The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting shadows that danced across the cabin walls, like memories refusing to rest. Outside, the Montana mountains wore their first snow of October 1912, silent and eternal, under a sky too vast to comprehend. Inside, two figures sat in the warm glow, an old man with hair like winter, and eyes that still saw too much, and a young man cleaning a rifle with the careful attention of someone about to go to war. Caleb Strand was 82 years old. His hands gnarled as old tree roots still held steady as he watched his grandson work the oiled cloth along the Winchester barrel. Daniel was 17, tall and eager in the way young men get when they think they understand what courage means. Tomorrow he would board a train east, heading toward conflicts in the Balkans that newspapers called small, but soldiers knew better. The boy looked up from his work rifle gleaming in the firelight. "Grandfather," Daniel said, voice careful with the weight of unasked questions. "Were you ever afraid when you were young, I mean?" "In the war." Caleb was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Wind pressed against the windows. The mountains held their breath. "Every day, boy," Caleb finally answered, his voice like gravel smoothed by a riverbed. "Every single day. But once I learned something that changed me. Fear isn't the enemy. Silence is." Daniel set down the rifle, giving his grandfather his full attention. The old man deserved that much. The old man deserved more. "Tell me," Daniel said. Caleb looked past his grandson, past the walls of the cabin, past the snowy peaks outside. His eyes found something distant, something that lived 34 years in the past but felt like yesterday. "It was autumn of 1878, Caleb said, "the year I stopped being a coward." The firelight seemed to dim. The cabin walls faded. And Caleb Strand, mountain man and keeper of old wounds, began to speak. "They didn't tie her to kill her. They didn't whip her to break her. They did something meaner than both because it let every man in town keep his hands clean and his conscience quiet, while a woman learned what pain looks like when it becomes public law. Out on the Montana flats where the sky stretches so wide it makes God seem distant and indifferent, two fence posts stood like a dare carved into the earth. Someone had driven them deep, meant them to last, meant them to be seen from the road, where anyone traveling to Silver Ridge would have to pass, would have to witness, would have to choose. Rope bit into wood, rope bit into flesh. Between those posts stretched too wide for mercy or comfort. Sister Catherine Webb hung suspended in a position designed by men who understood anatomy the way torturers do. Her wrists were bound low, forcing her to lean forward. Her ankles were tied high behind her, pulling her body into a curve that made every breath a negotiation with pain. Her habit was torn from road dust and struggle. The black fabric that should have marked her as holy was stained brown with dirt and darker with sweat. Her white coif meant to frame a face devoted to God hung askew and showed hair matted against her skull. The rosary beads she'd managed to keep clutched in her bound hands clicked softly when her fingers trembled. Her eyes were open, wide, not with fear anymore because fear was hours behind her. This was something past fear, something that lives in the space where hope starts to die, but the body stubbornly refuses to follow. She'd been there since dawn. 5 hours with the autumn sun climbing higher, pressing down with heat that felt personal. 5 hours without water. 5 hours while her shoulders screamed and her ribs protested every shallow breath. 5 hours while the town of Silver Ridge sat visible on the horizon, smoke rising from chimneys, life continuing as if nothing was wrong. 5 riders had passed on the road. She'd counted them. Watched them see her, watched them look away, watched them urge their horses faster as if distance from her suffering would erase it from their conscience. 2 of Vernon Hartwell's ranch hands stood watch from a distance, not close enough to be helping, not far enough to claim ignorance, just watching, making sure she stayed there, making sure she understood the lesson. The lesson was this: truth costs, speaking costs, witnessing costs. And out here on the frontier, the cost was paid in flesh and silence. Sister Catherine's lips moved in prayer. Not the prayers they'd taught her in Philadelphia when the world was clean and God felt close. Different prayers now, desperate prayers. "Father, forgive them," she whispered, voice cracked like old leather. "But please, please send someone." The wind carried her words away. The mountains didn't answer. The sky pressed down indifferent and enormous. And then from the rise to the east where the trail climbed out of the valley, a figure appeared. Caleb Strand came over the ridge on foot, leading a mule packed with beaver pelts and supplies from 3 weeks in the high country. He was 48 years old and built the way men get when their bodies are their only tools against the wilderness. Tall, broad across the shoulders, wearing buckskin that smelled of wood smoke and animal fat and honest sweat. His beard was long and streaked with gray that hadn't been there before Sarah died. His hat was leather-worn soft by weather and time. His rifle, a Sharps 50 caliber, rode across his back with the easy comfort of an old friend. His eyes, pale blue like winter ice, moved constantly across the landscape, reading it the way literate men read books. He saw the post from 300 yards. His body stopped moving. Just stopped like a deer catching scent of a wolf. His hand moved to the rifle without thought, the kind of movement that comes from having needed a weapon too many times to count. For a long moment, he just stood there on the ridge, looking down at what the post held. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched on the rifle. Every instinct he'd learned in 14 years of mountain solitude screamed at him to walk away. This was town business. This was the kind of thing that got men killed for interfering. This was exactly the sort of trouble he'd run from when he left Silver Ridge and swore never to come back. But his eyes caught the ropes, caught the way her hands shook like candle flames fighting wind, caught the way her body strained against the bindings with the awful patience of someone who has run out of strength but not out of suffering. And something in Caleb Strand's chest tightened with an old familiar anger that tasted like ashes and regret. His name was Caleb Strand. He'd been a soldier once, a sergeant in the Vermont Volunteers, a man who'd stood at Antietam and Gettysburg and learned what human beings could do to each other when they stopped seeing humanity. After the war, he'd come west with his sister Sarah, looking for clean air and open spaces and a chance to forget the color of blood on autumn leaves. For a few years, he'd almost succeeded. Then Sarah married. Then the bruises started. Then one winter night, she came to his cabin in the mountains, walking through snow, in her bare feet, begging him to help her leave. He'd told her to wait until spring. He'd told her he'd come for her when the weather cleared and the trapping season ended. He'd chosen beaver pelts over his sister's life and called it practical. They found Sarah in a ravine that marched frozen solid, her neck showing marks that snow couldn't hide. The town called it an accident. Her husband's father owned the mine. No one spoke against it. No one helped. And Caleb Strand, who'd survived a war, who'd killed 37 men in defense of the Union, who thought he understood courage, had learned what it felt like to be a coward. He'd lived in the mountains for 14 years after that, alone, speaking to no one but the peaks and the sky. Until now looking down at a woman tied between posts like an animal being broken, Caleb Strand felt something move in him that hadn't moved in 14 years. Not heroism, not righteousness, just a simple, stubborn refusal to look away twice. His boots crunched dry grass as he walked down the slope. The sound seemed loud in the enormous silence of the plains. The two ranch hands, watching from a distance, shifted their weight hands, moving toward their gun belts. Caleb didn't draw. He just walked steady and inevitable as a season changing. Up close, the woman's breathing came shallow and quick. Each inhale had to negotiate with pain, first had to ask permission from ribs that might be cracked from muscles stretched past their design. Dust streaked her face in patterns like war paint. A bruise bloomed dark along her left shoulder where the rope had cut circulation. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Not the fear in them, though fear was there. Not the pain, though pain was obvious. It was the look of someone who's been told her body is not her own, who's being taught through public torment that speaking truth is a crime punishable by flesh. She saw him and flinched, not away from him, toward the ropes, toward the knots, toward whatever came next. A response learned through hours of helplessness. "Please," she rasped, voice like boots on gravel. "Don't." Caleb stopped 10 feet from her, close enough to help, far enough to not be another threat. He kept his hands visible, palms open at his sides. Out here, hands told the truth before mouths ever did. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was low, steady, the kind of calm a man uses with wounded animals and frightened children. "I'm here to cut you down." Her eyes squeezed shut for a moment. When they opened again, her voice came thin and frightened and strangely specific, like a warning learned the hard way. "Don't," she said again. "It still hurts there." Caleb froze. Not because the words confused him, because he understood them perfectly. Pain like that lives in joints and tendons in places that don't show pretty bruises for doctors to document. Pain like that lingers after the visible wounds heal. Pain like that makes the next touch feel like a threat even when it's meant as help. He shifted his stance immediately, studying her position with the eye of a man who'd spent 4 years of war learning how bodies break. Her left shoulder hung wrong. Her ribs on that side barely moved when she breathed. The angle of her arms suggested rotator damage, maybe torn ligaments. "All right," Caleb murmured. "Tell me where. Exactly where." She swallowed. The simple act of it looked painful. "Shoulders," she whispered, "and my left side. When I breathe. When I move." Caleb stepped closer, moving slow as sunrise. He reached for the knot at her right wrist, then stopped and looked at her face, asking in permission, not with words, but with stillness, with the patience of a man who understood that after what she'd been through, even help needed consent. She didn't nod, couldn't nod, but she didn't pull away either. Her eyes met his, searching for the lie, for the trick, for the cruelty that would come disguised as kindness. She found none. Caleb took out his hunting knife. The blade was 12 inches of carbon steel, kept sharp enough to split hairs cleaned and oiled the way a man cares for tools that keep him alive. He didn't cut the rope with a sawing motion that would jerk her body. He cut it with surgical precision, supporting her weight with his forearm before the tension could release and tear at her damaged shoulder. What he did next was unthinkable out there on the Montana plains. He treated her like a person, like a human being with dignity and pain and the right to both. While she was still tied to posts meant to teach her, she was neither. He worked each knot with the same careful attention. The left wrist took longer because she'd warned him about that shoulder. He supported the weight of her arm with his hand before cutting, taking the burden into his own muscle and bone so hers wouldn't have to scream. When the last knot loosened at her left ankle, her body sagged all at once. Caleb moved in smoothly, catching her mid-fall without grabbing at her, without yanking, without adding panic to pain. His arm went under her ribs on the right side, the good side supporting her spine, while keeping pressure off the left, where she'd said it hurt. Her breath hitched sharp against his chest. She clutched at his buckskin shirt, fingers desperate for something solid in a world that had been all rope and sun and endless pain. Her legs didn't want to work. Her feet found the ground and immediately tried to leave it again. Caleb lowered her carefully to her knees first, then guided her back until she could sit against one of the posts. The post that had held her now supported her. The rope that had bound her lay coiled in the dust like a dead snake. He looked around then, because a thing like this never happened in isolation. Men who did this kind of work didn't just walk away. They watched. They waited. They made sure the lesson landed. No riders visible now, no ranch hands, just empty plains, an enormous sky, and the distant smudge of Silver Ridge on the horizon. But Caleb felt watched anyway. Towns had a way of watching without showing themselves. Curtains twitching in windows a mile away. Men on porches, tracking movement with eyes that pretended to look elsewhere. The woman's voice came again, smaller, now hollowed out by hours of sun and fear. "They said nobody would cut me down," she whispered. "They said you don't do that here. They said anyone who tried would take my place." Caleb's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. He knelt beside her, keeping his movements slow and visible, and offered her his canteen. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Out here, names cost. Names made you real, made you vulnerable, made you someone who could be found and punished again. "Catherine," she finally said, voice trembling around the syllables. "Catherine Webb, Sister Catherine Webb." Caleb knew that name. Not personally, not as family or friend, but he'd heard it spoken in town once years ago when he'd come down from the mountains for supplies. Spoken with disdain by men who wanted their world simple and their power unchallenged. Sister Catherine Webb was the nun who asked too many questions. The woman who wrote letters for widows and taught children to read and kept records that showed uncomfortable truths. The one who'd said calm as scripture in the general store that a town protecting only the powerful wasn't a town at all. Caleb had been there that day, standing in the back with flour and coffee in his arms. He remembered because the room went quiet the way it goes quiet when truth walks in unexpected and uninvited. "Catherine," Caleb said gently, Can you stand if I help you? She tried. Pain flashed across her face so fast it looked like anger. She made it halfway up before her left side stole her breath and her legs forgot their purpose. Caleb caught her again, his arm under her ribs, his hand supporting her back, taking her weight like it was his job to carry it. That's all right, he said. We're doing this slow. Don't take me to town, she whispered immediately, desperately. They'll just tie me up again. They'll make it worse. He'll make it worse. Caleb looked towards Silver Ridge. The town sat there like a bruise on the landscape, all false fronts and hidden violence. He hated town roads, hated what towns turned people into, hated the way civilization was just a pretty word for organized cruelty. But he also knew something Catherine didn't have right now: the power of witnesses. The kind of power that came from making private sins public, from forcing comfortable people to see what they'd been pretending not to notice. I'm taking you to a doctor, Caleb said. Not because I trust this town, I don't, but because you don't get to die slow out here while they stay comfortable inside. Her eyes searched his face, trying to find the trick, the trap, the moment when help would turn into another kind of hurt. Why, she breathed. Why would you stop? Caleb's voice, when it came, carried something old and heavy as stones at the bottom of a river. Because I had a sister once, he said. Sarah. She came to me for help, and I didn't give it. I told her to wait. I told her I'd come for her when it was convenient, when the season was right, when it didn't cost me anything. He paused, jaw working. They found her dead in the snow that March, and I've been living in these mountains for 14 years trying to outrun that, trying to hide from what I didn't do. His eyes met hers. I can't save Sarah. She's gone. But I can cut you down. I can carry you into town and make them look at what they did. I can refuse to walk away. Catherine's breath caught. Tears tracked through the dust on her face, but she didn't look away from him. He'll kill you for that, she said. Vernon Hartwell doesn't forgive. Vernon Hartwell, Caleb repeated. The name landed in his chest like a stone dropped in deep water. That's who did this. He owns this town, the sheriff, the judge, half the businesses. Anyone who crosses him disappears or ends up like me. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted her carefully in his arms. One arm under her knees, the other supporting her back, just below her shoulders, keeping pressure off her ribs. She stiffened at the contact but didn't fight him. Then I guess I'm about to cross him, Caleb said. He carried her toward his mule boots, steady in the dust, moving with the kind of purpose that can't be argued with. Behind them, the post stood empty. The rope lay abandoned. The lesson Vernon Hartwell meant to teach had just been unlearned by a mountain man who'd spent 14 years learning the wrong lesson himself. As Caleb settled Catherine onto the mule's saddle, the wind shifted and brought a smell he didn't like. Cigar smoke and soap. Town smell. The smell of men who don't work for a living. A figure stood far off near the road watching. Not close enough to be accused of anything. Not far enough to be innocent. Just watching in that deliberate way that said this moment was being recorded, cataloged, saved for future use. Caleb didn't wave, didn't call out. He just memorized the silhouette the way a soldier memorizes the position of enemy guns. Then he mounted behind Catherine, wrapped one arm carefully around her middle to hold her steady, and turned the mule toward Silver Ridge. They rode through the afternoon heat with the sun climbing higher and the plains loud with insects and judgment. Catherine kept her eyes on the horizon like she was afraid if she looked back she'd see the posts again, would see the rope still waiting for her. Caleb felt her breathing against his arm and matched his pace to it. He didn't talk because there are moments when talking feels like stealing air from someone who needs it more than you do. Still, she spoke once, voice small and bitter, with knowledge too heavy for any person to carry alone. You shouldn't have stopped, she said. Caleb kept his eyes forward on the road that led to town, to confrontation, to whatever came next. I already did, he said simply. They'll come for you now. Vernon's men. They'll hurt you for helping me. Let them try. Catherine let out a shaky breath that might have wanted to be a laugh if it remembered how. You don't understand. In Silver Ridge, pain is legal if it's done by the right hands. Vernon makes sure his hands are always right. Caleb's jaw flexed. Then I guess it's time someone made him use his hands in daylight, where people can see what right really looks like. As Silver Ridge drew closer, Catherine's body tightened, like the very sight of the town reached out to grab her. The town didn't look like Villeneuve. That was always the trick. It looked like a place where men bought flour and children chased dogs and church bells pretended the world was decent. But the porch sitters were already turning their heads. The street was quieting in that particular way it quiets when everyone knows something ugly has happened, and nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. Caleb rode straight down Main Street. He didn't hide, didn't take back ways or alleys. He rode Center Street in full daylight, with Sister Catherine visible to everyone, her torn habit and rope-burned wrists a testimony that couldn't be denied. People stopped what they were doing, stared. Some looked away quickly, shame coloring their faces. Others watched with something harder in their eyes, something that looked like anger at Caleb for making them see. Caleb didn't care about their comfort. He aimed for Dr. Harrison Fletcher's office because Fletcher had a reputation for one thing. You could bribe him to keep his mouth shut, but you couldn't bribe him to lie with his hands. When it came to medicine, Fletcher was honest. Inside, the air smelled of boiled cloth and harsh spirits, carbolic acid and desperation. Doctor. Fletcher looked up from his desk, saw Catherine, and the color drained from his face. Lord above, Fletcher breathed. Sister Catherine, they said you were dead. They lied, Caleb said flatly. He helped Catherine down from the mule, supporting her weight as her legs remembered how to hold a body upright. Fletcher was on his feet immediately, professional instinct overriding whatever fear he had of Vernon Hartwell's reach. He guided Catherine to an examination table, his hands gentle despite the tremor in them. Sit here, Fletcher said. His eyes flicked over her wrists, her shoulder, the way she guarded her left side. He didn't ask questions the way curious men do. He asked them the way tired men do, men who have patched up too many sins and still wake up in the same town. Who did this? Caleb stepped closer, not hovering, just present. Tell him if you want, Caleb said quietly to Catherine. Or don't. Catherine swallowed, then whispered a name that made the room feel colder. Vernon Hartwell. Fletcher's hands paused for just a fraction of a moment. His jaw tightened. Then he continued his examination, professional and careful. Caleb felt the name land heavy in his chest. Vernon Hartwell, the man who owned Silver Ridge the way some men own dogs. The man who'd built his fortune on railroad land deals in homesteader desperation. The man who wore respectability like expensive cologne and left the dirty work to hired hands with flexible morals. Fletcher finished his examination and shook his head, mouth tight. Badly strained shoulders, he said. The left worse than the right. Possible cracked rib on the left side, though I don't think it's broken clean through. Severe dehydration. Rope burns deep enough, they'll scar. He looked at Caleb. She needs rest, days of it, and she needs to be somewhere safe. She'll get it, Caleb said. At my place, up in the mountains. Fletcher's face showed doubt. Your place is outside town, far outside. If Vernon's men come for her and you're alone up there, then they'll learn why I've survived 14 years where better men died, Caleb finished. The door opened behind them. Caleb turned his hand, moving instinctively toward his rifle. But the man who entered wore a badge that caught the lamplight, and behind him, filling the doorway with the confidence of ownership, stood Vernon Hartwell himself. Sheriff Wade Turnbull was 41 years old with a badge bright as his cowardice in a gun he'd never fired in anger. He stepped aside to let Vernon enter like a servant making way for royalty. Vernon Hartwell looked exactly like a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. 50 years old, silver hair, immaculate, wearing a vest that cost more than most men in Silver Ridge earned in a month. His face was handsome in the way his sculptures are handsome, all clean lines and confident symmetry. He looked at Catherine on the examination table and sighed as if he'd found a stray dog in his parlor. There you are, sister, Vernon said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. We've been quite worried. Catherine's body tightened. Caleb felt it instantly, like a wire pulled taut. Vernon's eyes moved to Caleb and something flickered in them. Recognition, surprise, then calculation. Mr. Strand, Vernon said, and now his voice carried warmth. False friendship, the tone of a man greeting an old companion. Caleb Strand, it's been how many years? 14. Caleb went very still. He looked at Vernon. Hartwell really looked and felt the years peel back like old paint. The face was older now, fuller with prosperity and comfort. But the eyes were the same. The voice was the same. This was Lieutenant Vernon Hartwell, Company K, Vermont Volunteers. The officer Caleb had served under at Antietam. The man whose life Caleb had saved when a Confederate sniper had him in his sights. "Vernon," Caleb said, and the word tasted like copper in his mouth. Vernon smiled pleased. "I heard you'd gone feral in the mountains, living like a hermit. I'm surprised to see you down here, involving yourself in town business." He gestured at Catherine like she was a piece of furniture being discussed. "This is a delicate matter, Caleb. Church business, really. Sister Catherine has been making accusations, disturbing the peace. Father Benedict asked that we handle it appropriately. By tying her to posts like an animal," Caleb said, his voice flat and dangerous. Vernon's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "By teaching her the consequences of bearing false witness, of spreading lies about respectable men, of undermining the social order we've worked so hard to build here." He took a step closer to Caleb, lowering his voice like they were conspirators. "You remember Antietam, don't you? We were outnumbered 5-1. Everyone said we'd break. But we held because we understood order, discipline, the importance of following established authority." Vernon's hand moved in a gesture that took in the room, the town, the entire territory. "I've brought that same order here. Silver Ridge was chaos when I arrived. Now it's civilized, safe, prosperous. That requires maintaining standards, Caleb, even when it's uncomfortable." Catherine's voice cut through, cracked but fierce. "Safe, you murdered 12 families, made it look like Indian raids so you could steal their land for the railroad." Vernon's face barely changed, but Caleb, who'd fought beside him, saw the flicker. The quick calculation of a man deciding how to handle an inconvenient truth. "Careful, sister," Vernon said softly. "Bearing false witness is a sin, even for nuns." Caleb stepped between Vernon and Catherine, not aggressive, just present, just making clear that the woman behind him was under his protection now. "She's not going back on those posts," Caleb said. Vernon studied him for a long moment, the warmth drained from his face, replaced by something harder, colder, more honest. "You're making a mistake, old friend. You chose the mountains 14 years ago, chose isolation. Don't suddenly develop a conscience now." He paused, then delivered his next words like a knife between the ribs. "Besides, we both know how well it works out when you try to help someone. Your sister Sarah wasn't it. How did that turn out?" The room went silent. Even Fletcher stopped breathing. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, but his voice stayed level, stayed cold, stayed deadly calm. "That's exactly why I'm helping now. I didn't help Sarah. I told her to wait, to be patient, to trust that things would work out." He took a step toward Vernon. "They found her dead in the snow. And every day since I've had to live knowing I could have prevented it, knowing I chose convenience over her life." Another step. "So you're right, Vernon. I have been a coward. I have been hiding, but not anymore. Sister Catherine is leaving with me. And if you or your men try to stop us, you'll learn something I learned at Antietam." "What's that?" Vernon asked, his voice tight. "That I don't miss." Vernon's face flushed. His hand moved toward his coat, but the sheriff touched his arm, shook his head slightly. This wasn't the place. Too many witnesses, too much light. Vernon forced himself to relax, to smile, to become the civilized man again. "Very well," he said. "Sister Catherine may stay here tonight, under Dr. Fletcher's medical care." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "But Caleb, you're not the man you were at Antietam. That man was a soldier, had purpose, had brothers, had something to fight for." Vernon's smile turned sad, pitying. "Now you're just a hermit who couldn't save his own sister. What makes you think you can save anyone else?" He left. The sheriff followed. The door closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid. Fletcher let out a breath he'd been holding. "He'll come back," Fletcher said. "Tonight, tomorrow, soon. And he'll bring men who don't worry about witnesses or consequences." Caleb looked at Catherine. She was watching him with eyes that had seen too much suffering to believe in safety anymore. "We need evidence," Caleb said. "You mentioned a journal, records of what you witnessed." Catherine nodded slowly. "At the mission, hidden in the cellar, everything I documented, every dying man's confession, every murdered family, every forged land claim. Can you get to it? If Vernon doesn't burn the mission first." Caleb walked to the window, looked out at Silver Ridge in the afternoon light, looked at the mountains beyond, at the territory he'd claimed as his own for 14 years. He'd come down from those mountains for supplies and found something he couldn't ignore. A woman on post suffering in public silence. He'd cut her down, declared himself, made an enemy of a man he'd once fought beside. There was no going back now. Vernon Hartwell had called him a hermit, a coward, a man who couldn't save his own sister. All of it was true, all of it was fair, but it was also finished. "We'll go tonight," Caleb said, turning back to Catherine and Fletcher. "To the mission. Get the journal before Vernon's men find it. Then we ride for Helena, find a federal marshal, someone with authority bigger than Vernon's reach." Catherine gripped the edge of the examination table. "Father Benedict won't help. He's too frightened. The other sisters won't defy him." "They don't need to help," Caleb said. "They just need to not stop you. Can you ride?" "I don't think I have a choice." "You always have a choice. You can stay here, hope Vernon shows mercy. You can go back to the mission and pray he forgets. Or you can ride with me and fight back." Catherine looked at her rope-burned wrists, at the bruises already forming at the torn habit that marked her as holy and helpless both. "I choose fight," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. He looked at Fletcher. "Can you keep watch until dark, few hours at most?" Fletcher looked terrified, but he nodded. "I owe you this much," Fletcher said. "My son, 2 years back. Vernon wanted him hanged for a bar fight. You remember, you spoke up, said the other man started it. Vernon had to let him go." Caleb didn't remember, but he nodded anyway. Good men remembered their debts. Fletcher was trying to be a good man in a town that punished goodness. Outside, the sun was starting its long slide toward the mountains. In a few hours, darkness would come. In darkness, they could move. In darkness, Vernon's advantage of numbers would matter less, and Caleb's advantage of knowing terrain would matter more. Catherine closed her eyes, breathing through the pain, gathering strength for what came next. Caleb checked his rifle, counted his ammunition, and thought about Lieutenant Vernon Hartwell, the man he'd saved at Antietam, the man who'd become a monster while wearing the face of civilization. War did strange things to men. Caleb had thought he understood that. He'd seen men break, seen them turn cruel, seen them lose whatever goodness they'd carried into battle. But Vernon hadn't broken. Vernon had thrived, had taken the tools of warfare and applied them to business, to politics, to building an empire on stolen land and silent graves. And now Caleb Strand, hermit and coward and keeper of old guilt, was going to war one more time. Not for the Union, not for abstract principles of freedom, for something simpler and older. For the chance to do what he should have done for Sarah, to choose courage over comfort, to refuse the silence that let evil call itself order. The sun touched the mountains. Shadows grew long. Silver Ridge prepared for evening, unaware that tonight the old rules would break. Unaware that a mountain man and a nun were about to declare that some things cost more than personal safety, that some silences were too loud to endure. In a few hours they would ride for the mission, would steal back the evidence, would begin the long fight towards something that might be called justice if they survived long enough to see it. But first, in Dr. Fletcher's office, while the town settled into false peace, Caleb Strand sat with his rifle across his knees and watched the street and waited for dark. Beside him, Sister Catherine Webb prayed, not for rescue anymore. She'd had that. Now she prayed for strength, for courage, for the ability to see this through to whatever end was coming. And somewhere in Silver Ridge, Vernon Hartwell sat in his office and planned how to handle the inconvenient resurrection of a nun and the unfortunate intervention of an old soldier who should have stayed buried in his mountains. Night was coming. With it, everything would change. Darkness came to Silver Ridge like a mercy, softening the sharp edges of a town built on sharp dealings. Dr. Fletcher's office sat on a side street where lamplight from the main thoroughfare barely reached, and in that dimness, Caleb Strand kept watch, while Sister Catherine rested on the examination table, her breathing finally settling into something close to sleep. Fletcher sat at his desk, hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. The doctor was 62 years old and looked older. Too many years of patching up Vernon Hartwell's mistakes. Too many accidents that weren't accidents, too many quiet burials of inconvenient truths. "You don't know Vernon like I do," Fletcher said quietly, voice barely carrying across the small room. "He doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. Anyone who crosses him, they disappear, or they learn to regret staying visible." Caleb didn't take his eyes from the window. Out there in the dark, shapes moved. Could be nothing. Could be Vernon's men positioning themselves. In towns like this, the night belonged to whoever owned the sheriff. He wasn't always like this, Caleb said. Fletcher looked up. You knew him. We served together, the war. He was Lieutenant Hartwell then, Company K, Vermont Volunteers. Young officer full of ideals about union and freedom and fighting for what's right. Caleb's jaw tightened. Or maybe he just talked about those things. Maybe he was always this, and war gave him permission to show it. Catherine stirred on the table, not quite awake, but listening. Pain had a way of making sleep shallow, keeping part of the mind always alert for the next hurt. He said you saved his life, she murmured. Antietam, Caleb confirmed. September 1862. We were attacking across a cornfield. Confederate sharpshooter in a tree. I saw sunlight flash on his scope, saw him drawing aim on Vernon. Shot him before he could fire. He paused. Vernon told me he owed me, that he'd never forget. Today I called that debt. He refused to pay. Fletcher set down his coffee cup. The porcelain clinked against the desk too loud in the quiet room. Because he's not that man anymore, if he ever was. Men like Vernon, they use words like honor and debt when it serves them. Discard them just as quick when it doesn't. Outside hoofbeats, multiple horses moving slow down the side street. Fletcher's face went pale. Caleb stood smoothly, rifle coming up to a ready position. Not aimed, not yet, just prepared. Catherine sat up despite the pain, eyes wide and alert. The hoofbeats passed, kept going. Someone heading home late, or someone circling, or someone making sure Caleb knew he was being watched. Impossible to tell which. Fletcher let out a breath. They'll come tonight, he said. Vernon won't wait. He'll send men to take her back. Or worse. Then we don't wait either, Caleb said. He looked at Catherine. Can you ride? She slid off the table, testing her weight on legs that wanted to shake. Her left side made her gasp, but she stayed upright. I can ride. The mission, your journal. Can we get to it without Father Benedict stopping us? Catherine's face showed conflict. The priest who'd raised her, trained her, sent her west to serve. The same priest who'd watched her tied to posts and done nothing. He won't help, she said quietly, but he won't physically stop us. Father Benedict is many things. Violent isn't one of them. Caleb nodded. He went to Fletcher's desk, pulled out paper and a pencil. Draw me the mission. Every building, every door where the cellar is, where the journal's hidden. Catherine drew with steady hands despite the pain. The map took shape under lamplight. Main building with chapel and living quarters. Garden to the north. Cellar entrance on the east side, outside access with old wooden doors that creaked. There, she said, marking an X. Behind loose stones in the west wall. 4th row up from the floor, 6th stone from the corner. Vernon's men watching the mission. 2 at least, maybe more. Caleb studied the map, committing it to memory, the way he'd learned to memorize terrain in the war. Approach angles, sight lines, escape routes. We go now, he said, before Vernon gets organized, before he brings more men. We get in, get the journal, get out. Then we ride hard for the mountains. Fletcher stood. I'll get you supplies, food, bandages, water. Take my horse too. It's faster than your mule. Vernon will know you helped. Fletcher smiled, sad and tired. He already knows. The moment you walked through my door with Sister Catherine, I chose sides. Might as well make it count. 5 minutes later, they were in the alley behind Fletcher's office. The doctor had given them supplies, ammunition, and extra canteen. His horse was a bay mare, young and strong. Caleb helped Catherine mount, then swung up behind her. Thank you, Catherine said to Fletcher. The doctor shook his head. Thank me by surviving. Thank me by making those records count. Make Vernon answer for what he's done. They rode out through the back streets of Silver Ridge, moving through shadows that smelled of wood smoke and horse manure and the particular silence of a town pretending to sleep. No one stopped them. No one called out. The town looked away like it had learned to look away from everything uncomfortable. The mission sat 2 miles north of Silver Bridge proper, close enough to serve the town, but far enough to maintain some separation between the holy and the profane. Under moonlight, the white walls looked ghostly, the cross on the chapel roof reaching towards stars that offered no judgment and no mercy. Caleb reined in at the tree line 300 yards out. He dismounted, helped Catherine down, then stood studying the mission grounds with the patience of a hunter reading sign. There, he said, quietly pointing. Two men by the main entrance. Campfire. They're not trying to hide. Vernon wants us to know they're there, Catherine said. Wants us to know he controls this place. Do you see others? She studied the shadows. Can't tell, but assume at least two more. Vernon doesn't do anything without backup. Caleb nodded. He pulled his Sharps rifle from the saddle scabbard, checked the load. Then he looked at Catherine with eyes that had made hard decisions before and knew how to make them again. I need you to listen careful. We approach from the north through the garden. Stay low, move when the wind moves so sound gets covered. Get to the cellar door. You go in alone because you know exactly where to find what we need. I stay outside, watch the approaches. He paused. If shooting starts, you take the journal and run. Don't wait for me. Head east to the creek, follow it downstream. It'll take you to the Helena Road eventually. I won't leave you. You will, because the journal matters more than any one person. Those names, those testimonies, they're the only chance those murdered families have for justice. You don't get to throw that away for sentiment. Catherine's jaw set, but she nodded. She understood duty, understood that sometimes love meant letting someone face danger alone. They moved through the night like shadows learning to be solid. Caleb let his buckskin blending with the dark, his steps placed with the care of a man who'd stalked game through terrain that would kill the careless. Catherine followed her torn habit, catching on brush, but her footsteps surprisingly quiet for someone who'd spent her life in cities and missions. The garden smelled of turned earth and herbs gone to seed. They crossed between rows of vegetables planted by sisters who believed in feeding the hungry. Tomatoes on stakes, beans climbing poles, squash spreading like prayer across the ground. The cellar door was ahead. 20 feet, 15, 10. Caleb held up his hand. Catherine stopped. Voices from around the corner of the main building. Two men talking casual bored. Guards who thought this was easy duty, watching an empty mission where nothing would happen. Check the perimeter again, one voice said. We just checked. There's nothing. She's not stupid enough to come back here. Vernon said to be thorough. Vernon's not standing out here freezing his stones off. Laughter, then footsteps. Coming closer. Caleb and Catherine pressed against the mission wall, barely breathing. The guards walked past 30 feet away, silhouettes against the stars, rifle barrels catching moonlight. They passed, kept going. The footsteps faded. Caleb moved to the cellar door, old wood iron hinges that had seen better days. He pulled gently. The door creaked like a sinner in church. Both of them froze. No shout, no running feet. The guards were far enough away and wind covered the sound. The door opened. Darkness below. Go, Caleb whispered. Quick and quiet. I'll watch. Catherine descended stone steps into blackness. Caleb positioned himself where he could see both the main entrance and the approach from the north. His rifle was loaded, primed, ready. He didn't want to use it. Every shot would bring more men. But if it came to that, he'd make the first shots count. Below in the cellar, Catherine moved by memory and touch. The darkness was complete. She felt along the west wall, counting stones. Fourth row up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The stone was loose. She pulled it free, reached into the cavity behind. Her fingers found oilcloth, wrapped around leather. The journal. She pulled it out, held it against her chest like a child. Inside this book were the last words of dying men. Jacob Mills, Thomas Hartley, Samuel Reed, 12 families worth of truth, 12 graves that deserved witnesses. Above a shout, someone's at the cellar. Catherine's heart stopped. Footsteps running, more voices. Caleb's voice low and urgent. Catherine, now. She scrambled up the stairs. Caleb grabbed her arm, pulled her out. They ran through the garden boots, crushing herbs, rosemary and sage releasing scent like prayers interrupted. Behind them, men shouting, torches being lit, the peaceful night transforming into chaos. They reached the tree line. The horse was waiting. Caleb practically threw Catherine into the saddle, vaulted up behind her. A gunshot. The bullet went wide, smacking into a tree trunk. Caleb didn't return fire. Not yet. He kicked the horse into motion, guiding it through trees by moonlight, an instinct in 14 years of knowing this country better than any man alive. More shots behind them. Angry, desperate, blind. Vernon's men shooting at sounds and shadows. Caleb leaned low over Catherine's shoulder, guiding the horse down a ravine across a creek that would hide their tracks, up the far side into forest so thick the moon barely penetrated. They rode hard for 30 minutes. Then Caleb slowed, listening. No pursuit. Either they'd lost them in the dark, or Vernon's men were smart enough to know following a mountain man into his territory at night was suicide. Catherine was shaking, not from fear, from relief and exhaustion and the weight of what she held. "We got it," she said, voice trembling. "We actually got it." "Don't celebrate yet," Caleb said. "Vernon knows we have it now. He'll come with everything he has." "Then where do we go?" Caleb looked up at the stars, orienting himself by constellations that had guided him through countless nights in the high country. "Up," he said simply, "into the mountains, my territory, my rules." They climbed through the night. The horse was strong, but the grade was steep and elevation made every breath count for less. The air thinned and cooled. Pine trees gave way to spruce, then to alpine meadows where grass grew silver in starlight. By dawn, they'd gained 3,000 feet. Below, Silver Ridge was invisible behind ridges. Above, peaks caught first light and blazed like promises God might keep if you survived long enough to collect. Caleb found a spot where a rock overhang created shelter, and a creek provided water, and sight lines gave warning of anyone approaching from below. He helped Catherine down, then tended to the horse. Unsaddled, it rubbed it down, let it drink and graze. Catherine sat on a flat rock, journal in her lap, watching Caleb work. He moved with economy, no wasted motion, every action purposeful. This was a man who'd lived alone so long he'd forgotten how to be inefficient. "You live like this?" she asked. Every day for 14 years. "Why?" Caleb looked up at her. His face was weathered by sun and wind, scarred by a life that hadn't been gentle. But his eyes were clear. "Because Sarah died and I didn't want to be around people anymore. Didn't want to see them looking at me knowing I'd failed. Didn't want to hear them pretending it wasn't my fault when we both knew it was." He finished with the horse, came to sit near Catherine, but not too close. Respecting space. Respecting that after what she'd been through, proximity might feel like pressure. "The mountains don't judge," he said. "Don't expect anything. You work, you survive. You don't, you die. It's honest in a way people stopped being." Catherine opened the journal, ran her fingers over the first entry. "Jacob Mills," she read quietly. "Died May 15th, 1878. His confession: Vernon's men killed the Parker family. Made it look like Indians. I saw it myself. Said nothing. God forgive me." Her voice caught. "He was dying of lung fever. Could barely breathe. Used his last strength to tell me the truth. Made me promise I'd write it down. Made me promise someone would know." She looked at Caleb. "That's why I couldn't run. Why I documented everything, even knowing Vernon would find out. These men, in their last moments, they chose truth over comfort. How could I choose anything?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of 14 years thinking about choice and consequence. "My sister came to my cabin in a snowstorm. February of '74. She'd walked 3 miles through drifts up to her waist. Her feet were bare. Her dress was torn. She had blood in her hair from where her husband hit her. He stared at his hands. She begged me to help her leave, to take her somewhere safe, to protect her from him. The wind moved through the pines, a sound like the world breathing. I told her I was in the middle of trapping season. Beaver pelts were fetching good prices. If she could just wait until spring, I'd have enough money to help her start somewhere new. I promised I'd come get her. Made her walk back down that mountain." His hands clenched into fists. "They found her dead 2 weeks later, at the bottom of a ravine. Sheriff said she fell, but her neck had marks, and her husband's knuckles were split and bruised." Catherine reached out, stopped just short of touching his hand. "You couldn't have known." "I did know. That's the thing. I knew he was hurting her, knew it was getting worse, knew she was afraid. And I chose beaver pelts, chose money, chose my own comfort over her life." He finally looked at Catherine. "So when I saw you on those posts, when I heard your voice saying it still hurts there, I couldn't walk away. Not again. Not ever again. Some mistakes you only get to make once." Catherine did touch his hand then, just briefly, just long enough to say she understood. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher and the mountains came alive with birdsong and the small sounds of a world that continued regardless of human suffering or human courage. Caleb built a small fire, kept it low and smokeless, using dry wood and careful tending. He caught 2 trout from the creek using a line and hook he kept in his pack, cleaned them with his hunting knife, cooked them wrapped in leaves near the coals. Catherine watched him work with something like wonder. "How do you know all this?" "War taught me some. Mountains taught me the rest. You either learn or you starve. Nature's an honest teacher that way." He showed her how to identify edible plants. Wild onions growing near the creek, pine nuts still clinging to cones, berries that looked poisonous but weren't, and others that looked safe but would kill you. "The mountains give you everything you need," Caleb said, "but you have to pay attention. One mistake and you're done." "Is that why you survived paying attention?" "That and being too stubborn to die." Sometimes survival is just refusing to quit long enough for the universe to give up trying to kill you. They ate the trout and wild onions. Catherine hadn't realized how hungry she was until food touched her tongue. She ate like someone starving, which she supposed she was. Vernon's post had stolen appetite along with dignity. After they'd eaten, Caleb stood watch while Catherine rested. She tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled her down like water. She slept curled on her side with the journal tucked against her chest, sleeping the way people sleep when they're finally temporarily safe. Caleb let her sleep for 3 hours. Then movement in the valley below caught his eye. Riders, 6 of them, moving up the trail with the determination of men who knew where they were going. Vernon's men had found their tracks. Caleb woke Catherine gently. "We need to move. They're coming." She was on her feet instantly, pain forgotten in the sharp clarity of danger. "How many?" "6 that I can see." "Can we outrun them?" "Not on one horse carrying double, and not with you hurt." He studied the terrain with the eye of a man who'd fought defensive battles before. The rock overhang at their backs, open ground in front for 50 yards, dense timber beyond that, good sight lines, but no cover. "We fight," he said simply. Catherine's eyes widened. "Fight, there's 6 of them." "7 actually," said a voice from the trees. They both spun. A man stepped out from the pines, hands held high and empty. He was mid-40s, wearing travel-worn clothes and a badge that caught the light, a federal marshal's badge. "Please don't shoot," the man said calmly. "My name is Clayton Burke, U.S. Marshal, and I've been tracking Vernon Hartwell for 8 months. Caleb's rifle didn't waver. "Prove it." Burke moved slowly, opened his coat to show the badge pinned inside. Silver authentic, with an engraved number that marked it official. "Badges can be faked," Caleb said. "They can," Burke agreed, "but I can tell you something only a real federal marshal would know. Vernon Hartwell isn't just stealing land, he's selling it to the Northern Pacific Railroad. $470,000 in fraudulent land grants. Every homesteader claim that's disappeared, every family that's been killed, it's all to clear the route for railroad expansion." Catherine stepped forward. "How do you know this?" Burke looked at her, recognition in his eyes. "Sister Catherine, Dr. Fletcher sent word you were alive. I was already in the area investigating the land fraud. I've been watching Silver Ridge for months." "Why didn't you arrest Vernon already?" Caleb demanded. "Because everything looks legal on paper. Vernon's careful. Forged documents, bribed surveyors, witnesses who lie under oath. I needed something that couldn't be dismissed or buried. I needed what Sister Catherine has." His eyes moved to the journal. Dying declarations, documented murders, names, dates, locations. That's evidence even Vernon's lawyers can't make disappear. Caleb studied the man. Burke looked competent, careful, tired in the way lawmen get when they've been chasing corruption too long. His hands were weathered, his eyes moved constantly, tracking threats. A professional. "Those riders in the valley," Caleb said. "Vernon's men, they'll be here in 20 minutes. "I know. I passed them on the trail. They didn't see me." "So what do we do?" Burke smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been waiting a long time to spring a trap. "We let them come, but they won't be coming to 6 against 2. They'll be coming to 6 against 8. "8, Catherine said. "I didn't come alone. Deputy Marshal Ellen Grady has been undercover in Silver Ridge for 3 months. posing as a saloon girl. Vernon's men talk around her thinking she's harmless. She's been gathering intelligence, documenting movements, building our case. Burke looked down the valley. She's down there now with 2 more federal marshals. When Vernon's men ride up this mountain, they'll be caught between us above and federal law below. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly. He'd learned not to trust hope, but possibility. The recognition that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone in this fight. "Why should we trust you?" Catherine asked. Burke met her eyes with the directness of a man who'd practiced honesty so long it had become natural. "Because 2 years ago, Dr. Fletcher's son was arrested for a bar fight. Vernon wanted him hanged as an example. I investigated. Found out the other man started it, that Fletcher's boy was defending himself. I got him released. Fletcher remembered. When you needed help, he sent word to me." He paused. "I can't prove I'm legitimate right here, right now. But those riders coming up the mountain are absolutely planning to kill you and take that journal. You can trust me and take the chance I'm lying, or trust that Vernon's men are exactly what they appear to be." Caleb looked at Catherine. She looked back. "Some decisions you make with words, others with silence that speaks louder." "All right," Caleb said. "We trust you. What's the plan?" Burke's smile widened. "We let them ride into an ambush. Classic pincer movement. You and I hold the high ground. Ellen and the others block the retreat. Vernon's men find themselves surrounded by federal authority with nowhere to run. And if they fight, then we show them that federal law has teeth." They positioned themselves quickly. Burke had a Winchester rifle and knew how to use it. He took the south side of the overhang. Caleb took the north. Catherine stayed behind cover with the journal protected, but able to watch. The riders came up the trail 15 minutes later. 6 men on 6 horses, moving with the confidence of superior numbers. Caleb recognized one of them, Dutch Henry Keller Vernon's lead enforcer, a man who'd killed for money so many times he'd stopped counting. The riders reached the meadow where Caleb and Catherine had camped, saw the cold fire, the signs of recent occupation. Dutch held up his hand, stopped the group. "Strand," Dutch called out, "we know you're here. Give us the nun and the journal, and you can walk away." Caleb didn't answer. Let them wonder. Let them get nervous. Dutch tried again. "Vernon's offering you a deal. Turn over Sister Catherine and the journal. You get $500 and safe passage back to your mountains. No one needs to get hurt. Except the 12 families Vernon murdered," Catherine shouted back. The riders tensed. Dutch's face hardened. "That's their answer," he said to his men. "Take them." The riders spread out, preparing to advance up the slope. And that's when Ellen Grady stepped out from the trees behind them, with 2 federal marshals flanking her, rifles raised. "Federal marshals," Ellen's voice rang clear and hard. "You're surrounded. Lay down your weapons." Dutch spun his horse, saw 3 rifles pointed at him from behind, looked up the slope, and saw Burke stand with his badge visible and his Winchester ready. "U.S. Marshal Clayton Burke," Burke called down. "You're under arrest for assault, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Surrender now." For a moment, everything hung balanced on a knife edge. 6 men caught between federal authority above and below. They could surrender, could face trial, could hope Vernon's money would save them, or they could fight. Dutch Henry Keller was not a man who surrendered. His hand dropped to his pistol. The mountain exploded in gunfire. Caleb's first shot took Dutch's hat off, a warning that said he could have taken his head. Burke's shot hit one of the riders in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Ellen and her marshals fired low, aiming for horses and legs, trying to stop without killing. But Vernon's men had been paid to do a job, and some men value money over life. They returned fire, wild and desperate. Bullets whined off rocks. One caught Catherine's shelter, spraying stone chips. Caleb's second shot wasn't a warning. It hit the man aiming at Catherine's position, knocked him flat. The Sharp's rifle spoke with authority that left no room for argument. The battle lasted 3 minutes but felt like 3 hours. Burke moved with military precision, firing and moving, never staying still. Ellen and her marshals advanced steadily, professional and coordinated. Vernon's men caught in the crossfire broke. 2 dropped their weapons immediately, hands high. 1 tried to run, and Ellen's shot took his horse down, leaving him sprawling in the dirt. Dutch held out longest, firing back with the stubborn fury of a man who knows he's lost but refuses to accept it. Then Caleb Sharp spoke again. The bullet hit the rock 6 inches from Dutch's head, showering him with stone fragments. Dutch looked up the slope, saw Caleb sighting down on him, and knew the next shot wouldn't miss. He dropped his pistol. "Don't shoot, I surrender." The silence after gunfire always sounds too loud. Ears ringing, smoke drifting, the smell of burnt powder heavy on the mountain air. Burke and his marshals moved in efficient and careful. They cuffed Vernon's men, searched them for weapons, secured the area like they'd done this 100 times before. Catherine emerged from cover, shaking but whole. The journal was still clutched to her chest. Caleb lowered his rifle. His hands were steady, but his heart hammered. He'd hoped to never fire at another human being. The war should have been enough killing for any lifetime. But some fights find you whether you want them or not. Burke climbed up to their position, breathing hard from exertion and adrenaline. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Caleb said. "Your people." "One of my marshals took a graze, nothing serious." "Vernon's men are another story. 1 dead, 3 wounded, 2 surrendered intact." He looked at the journal in Catherine's arms. "That the evidence?" She nodded. Burke held out his hand. "May I?" Catherine hesitated, then passed it over. Burke opened it carefully, read the first few entries. His face went hard as carved wood. "This is enough," he said quietly. "This is enough to hang Vernon Hartwell and everyone who helped him." He looked up at Caleb and Catherine. "You two just changed everything." Ellen Grady climbed up to join them. She was 30 years old, lean and capable, with eyes that missed nothing. She'd spent 3 months playing a role in Silver Ridge's saloon, smiling at men who thought they were too smart to be caught listening to confessions disguised as bragging. "Burke," she said, "we need to move. When these men don't report back, Vernon will know something went wrong." Burke nodded. "Agreed. We take the prisoners to Helena, file formal charges, get this journal into federal court where Vernon's influence doesn't reach." He turned to Caleb and Catherine. "That means you're coming with us, as witnesses, as evidence, as the people brave enough to stand against this." Caleb looked at Catherine. She looked back. They'd come this far together. They'd finish it together. "We'll come," Caleb said, "but on one condition." "What's that?" Catherine testifies. "In person, not just the journal, her actual testimony about what she saw, what she documented, what Vernon did to her. The men who died trusted her with their last words. She needs to be the one who speaks them in court." Burke studied Catherine. "That puts a target on you. Vernon will do everything he can to stop you reaching Helena." "He already put a target on me," Catherine said. "When he tied me to those posts, I'm not hiding now." Burke's respect showed clear on his face. "Then we ride together. All of us. Federal escorts for the witnesses. No one travels alone until this is finished." They gathered their supplies, secured the prisoners, prepared for the descent from the mountain. The sun was high now, blazing down on peaks that had seen countless human dramas play out and would see countless more. Caleb helped Catherine onto the horse. She was exhausted, hurt running on determination and duty. But her eyes were clear. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen courage over safety, truth over silence, justice over her own comfort. As they began the long ride toward Helena, toward trial, toward whatever end this story would find, Caleb thought about Sarah, about the choice he'd made 14 years ago, about beaver pelts and convenience and the price of looking away. He couldn't save Sarah. That failure would live in him until he died. But he'd saved Catherine, had helped her fight back, had refused to let evil call itself order without challenge. It wasn't redemption. Redemption was too clean a word for the messy business of living with guilt. But it was something, a step, a refusal, a line drawn in Montana dirt that said this far and no further. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal. Ahead, Silver Ridge waited with its secrets and its shame. And somewhere in that town, Vernon Hartwell was learning that the woman he'd tried to silence had found her voice, that the man he'd tried to intimidate had found his courage, that the old debts from Antietam were being paid in federal justice. The rope had been cut. The silence had been broken. And nothing in Silver Ridge would ever be the same. They rode into Silver Ridge at noon the next day with 6 prisoners in chains and the weight of federal authority behind them. The sight stopped the town cold. People on the street froze mid-step, mid-conversation, mid-pretense that everything was normal. Because what rode down Main Street was proof that normal had just ended. Marshal Clayton Burke led the procession, his badge catching sunlight like a promise. Behind him came Ellen Grady, and the two federal marshals, rifles ready and eyes scanning for trouble. Then the prisoners, hands bound and mounted on horses that someone else controlled. Dutch Henry Keller rode with his head down, defeat written in every line of his body, and behind them all Caleb Strand and Sister Catherine Webb. Visible, undeniable, alive. Catherine sat straight in the saddle despite the pain in her shoulders and ribs. She wore her torn habit like battle armor. Her rope-burned wrists were exposed for everyone to see. She didn't hide what had been done to her, didn't look away from the townspeople who'd looked away from her. Some faces showed shame when they saw her. Others showed anger that she'd come back, that she'd survived, that she was forcing them to see consequences for their silence. Burke reined in at the town hall. The building was 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a bell tower that called people to meetings and auctions and the occasional dispensing of what passed for justice. Today it would serve a different purpose. Burke dismounted and his voice carried across the street with the authority of a man who'd practiced command. By order of the federal government of the United States, I'm convening an official hearing into charges of land fraud, conspiracy, and murder. All citizens of Silver Ridge are invited to attend. Those with testimony are encouraged to speak. He paused, letting that sink in. Vernon Hartwell is hereby ordered to appear and answer to these charges. Failure to comply will be considered contempt and an admission of guilt. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when a town realizes the rules just changed and no one knows what comes next. Then Sheriff Turnbull pushed through the crowd. His badge was bright, but his face was pale. Behind him, filling the doorway of his office like he owned it, stood Vernon Hartwell. Vernon looked exactly as he had 2 days ago. Immaculate vest, silver hair, perfect face showing nothing but mild curiosity. But Caleb, who'd fought beside him and learned to read him, saw the tension in his jaw, saw the calculation in his eyes. "Marshal Burke," Vernon said with a smile that didn't reach anywhere important. "This is quite dramatic, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a respected businessman, a pillar of this community. Whatever charges you think you have, I assure you they're based on misunderstandings and malicious accusations." Burke walked toward Vernon with steady, measured steps. "Then you won't mind answering questions under oath, in public, with witnesses." Vernon's smile tightened. "I have nothing to hide, but perhaps we could discuss this privately. No need to disrupt the entire town with baseless allegations." "Nothing about this is private anymore," Catherine said. Her voice carried clear across the street. "You made it public when you tied me to posts, when you left me there for hours while this town looked away, when you taught everyone that silence is how power protects itself." Vernon's eyes moved to her and something cold flickered in them, the mask slipping for just a moment. "Sister Catherine, I'm glad you've recovered from your episode. Father Benedict has been quite worried. Perhaps you should return to the mission rest. Let the men handle complicated matters of law and business." "The only thing complicated," Catherine said, "is how you've managed to murder 12 families and call it progress." The crowd stirred, murmurs rising like water beginning to boil. Vernon's face flushed. "That's slander, actionable slander. Sheriff, arrest this woman for defamation." Turnbull didn't move. He looked at Burke, at the federal marshals, at the guns they carried. He was corrupt, but not stupid. Federal authority trumped local corruption every time. Burke held up a leather-bound journal. "This contains documentation of 12 murders, names of the dead, names of the killers, dates, locations of graves, all recorded by Sister Catherine based on deathbed confessions from men who worked for you, Vernon. Men whose guilt finally outweighed their fear." He opened the journal. "Jacob Mills died May 15, 1878. His testimony: I watched Vernon Hartwell's men kill the Parker family. Made it look like an Indian raid. I said nothing because I was paid $50. God forgive me." Burke looked up. "Thomas Hartley died July 8, 1878. His testimony: I helped bury 3 miners who discovered Vernon's forged land claims. We shot them and dumped them in a ravine. I'm going to hell for what I did." Vernon's face was stone now. Lies from dying men looking to shift their own guilt. Not admissible in court. "Dying declarations are absolutely admissible," Burke said, "especially when there are 12 of them, especially when they all tell the same story." He looked at the crowd. Vernon Hartwell has been selling land to the Northern Pacific Railroad, land he doesn't legally own. To get that land, he's been killing homesteaders and forging claims. Every family that disappeared, every accident that wasn't really an accident, it all leads back to him. Vernon laughed, actually laughed, but it sounded hollow. This is absurd. I'm being accused by a hysterical nun and a hermit who abandoned his own sister. You expect Silver Ridge to believe them over me? I expect Silver Ridge to believe the evidence, Burke said, and to do what should have been done months ago, tell the truth. No one moved. The crowd stood frozen between habit and conscience. They'd been silent so long. Silence was comfortable. Silence was safe. Then someone shifted. An older woman weathered by sun and hard living stepped forward. Caleb didn't know her name, but he recognized the look. The look of someone who'd been carrying weight too long and was finally ready to put it down. "My name is Eleanor Parker," she said. Her voice shook but held. "My husband John didn't disappear. He was murdered. Vernon's men killed him because he wouldn't sell our land. I found his body. I buried him in secret because those same men said if I told anyone, my children would be next." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Vernon's face went tight. "That's grief speaking. The woman is clearly distraught." "I saw it too," another voice called out, a miner young with hands black from coal. "Thomas Hartley, the night before he died, he was drunk in the saloon crying. Said he couldn't live with what he'd done. Said Vernon had them kill people who asked too many questions. Next day there was a mine collapse. Thomas was the only one in that section. Convenient." More voices now, like a dam breaking, like people who'd been holding their breath for years finally remembering how to exhale. A shopkeeper talked about being threatened into silence. A farmer described watching Vernon's men burn out his neighbor. A widow spoke about her brother who'd questioned a land survey and disappeared that same night. Not everyone spoke. Some stayed silent, loyal to Vernon, or scared of what truth would cost them. But enough spoke. Enough voices joined to become something Vernon couldn't dismiss as hysteria or lies. Burke let them speak. Let the testimonies build like stones, stacking into a wall. When the voices finally quieted, he looked at Vernon. "Still think these are baseless allegations?" Vernon's mask had shattered. His face showed rage now, pure and ugly. "You can't do this. I built this town. I brought wealth, investment, prosperity. Everything I did was for order, for civilization. These people owe me." "They owe you nothing," Catherine said. She dismounted, walked toward Vernon despite her pain, stood 10 feet from him and met his eyes without flinching. "You murdered 12 families. Stole their land, called it progress. When I started documenting what you'd done, you had me tied up like an animal. You taught this town that truth is punishable, that suffering is acceptable if the right people inflict it." She held up her wrists, showed the rope burns. "But I'm still here. The truth is still here, and your power ends today." Vernon's hand moved toward his coat, toward a pistol everyone suddenly realized he was carrying. Turnbull saw it and stepped back, choosing self-preservation over loyalty. The crowd scattered, but Caleb was already moving. He'd been watching Vernon the whole time, reading him the way he'd learned to read enemies in war. He saw the decision form in Vernon's eyes half a second before Vernon's hand moved. Caleb Sharp's rifle came up smooth and fast. He didn't aim at Vernon. He aimed at the ground 6 inches in front of Vernon's feet and fired. The bullet hit dirt and exploded upward in a shower of dust and stone chips. Vernon froze, hand on his pistol, but not drawing. Every federal marshal had a gun trained on him now. "Don't," Burke said quietly. "You draw that weapon, you die here. Is that how you want this to end?" Vernon's face worked through emotions too fast to track. Rage, fear, calculation, desperation. For a moment, it seemed like he might draw anyway, might choose suicide by marshal rather than face trial. Then his hand moved away from the pistol, moved up slowly. Surrender. Burke and his marshals moved in fast. They took Vernon's gun, searched him for others, found a derringer in his boot and a knife in his vest. They cuffed his hands behind his back. Vernon Hartwell, the man who'd owned Silver Ridge, was just a prisoner now. "You're under arrest," Burke said formally, "for conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, and assault. You'll be transported to Helena for trial in federal court." Vernon looked at Caleb, really looked at him for the first time since this started. You saved my life at Antietam, Vernon said. I told you I'd never forget. I owed you. You didn't owe me, Caleb said. You owed the men we fought beside. The principles we said we believed in. You forgot those the moment they became inconvenient. Vernon's laugh was bitter. Principles don't build towns. Power builds towns. Money builds towns. I brought civilization to wilderness, and you're destroying it for sentiment. You brought organized cruelty, Caleb said, and called it civilization because it wore a nice vest. They took Vernon away, locked him in his own jail with his own corrupt sheriff watching both of them prisoners now. The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in hushed voices, processing what they'd just witnessed. Some looked relieved. Others looked scared of what came next. Change is terrifying, even when it's necessary. Dr. Fletcher found Caleb and Catherine in the street. You did it, he said, wonder in his voice. You actually did it. It's not done yet, Burke said, joining them. Trial is months away. Vernon's rich. He'll hire expensive lawyers. He'll fight this every step. But he'll fight it in federal court, Catherine said, where his money matters less than evidence, where dying declarations carry weight, where judges can't be bought as easily as sheriffs. Burke nodded. That's the hope. But you need to understand, all of you. There will be consequences. Vernon has friends, allies, people who profited from his crimes. They won't give up just because he's in chains. Burke was right. The consequences came that very night. Someone burned Caleb's mountain cabin. 14 years of solitary life reduced to ashes and charred logs. Everything he owned, except what he carried on his back. Gone. The next morning they found the mission vandalized. Windows broken. Threats painted on walls. Witch, nun, and liar in letters 2 feet tall. Father Benedict sat on the mission steps with his head in his hands when they arrived. He looked up at Catherine with shame and sorrow. I'm sorry, he said. I should have protected you, should have stood with you. Instead, I watched you suffer and told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Catherine knelt beside him. You helped me in the end. You let me take the journal. That took courage. It took desperation. It took you shaming me into remembering what I'm supposed to stand for. He looked at the vandalized walls. This is my penance. I'll clean it, repair it, and I'll preach this Sunday about courage and complicity, about how silence enables evil. 2 families pulled their children from Catherine's school, said they didn't want their kids taught by someone who caused trouble. Other families enrolled their children for the first time, saying they wanted kids who learned to speak truth. The town was dividing, not cleanly, not simply, but dividing along lines of conscience and cowardice, courage and comfort. Der Fletcher received threats. His office window was smashed one night with a rock wrapped in paper that said, traitor. He cleaned up the glass and kept treating patients, kept standing by his choice. Burke organized protection. Federal marshals stayed in Silver Ridge, watched over witnesses, made sure Vernon's remaining allies knew that violence would be met with federal response. 6 weeks after Vernon's arrest, they transported him to Helena under heavy guard. Caleb, Catherine, Burke, and Ellen rode along. The journey took 4 days through autumn, turning toward winter, through mountains that blazed with gold aspens and dark pines. Vernon rode in chains and silence. The man who'd talked so much about civilization and progress had nothing left to say. Helena was the territorial capital, bigger and busier than Silver Ridge. The courthouse was stone and timber, built to last and to impress. Inside, federal judges dispensed justice that couldn't be bought with local influence. The trial took 2 weeks. Vernon's lawyers were expensive and skilled. They tried to discredit Catherine as unstable, tried to paint the dying men as liars shifting blame, tried to argue that everything Vernon did was legal according to territorial law as it existed. But Burke's evidence was overwhelming. The journal, the testimonies, the bodies they'd exhumed from unmarked graves, the forged documents, the pattern of death and land transfer too consistent to be coincidence. Catherine testified for 6 hours over 2 days. She spoke clearly, precisely, without embellishment or drama. Just the facts, the dying men's words, the families who disappeared, the land that somehow always ended up in Vernon's possession. Vernon's lawyers tried to break her, called her hysterical, suggested she'd fabricated the journal, implied she had ulterior motives. Catherine never wavered. She met every accusation with calm testimony backed by evidence. When they asked why a nun would involve herself in such matters, she said simply, "Because witnessing injustice and saying nothing is blasphemy. My vows to God require truth, not comfort." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict with a voice that tried to stay steady. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On 12 counts of murder, we find the defendant guilty. On charges of land fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Vernon Hartwell stood expressionless as they read count after count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging. Execution scheduled for March 1880. 6 of Vernon's men received similar sentences. 3 got prison terms ranging from 10 to 20 years. Sheriff Turnbull received 5 years for conspiracy and corruption. Justice, slow and imperfect, had arrived. Catherine wept when they left the courthouse. Not from joy, from relief and exhaustion and the weight of carrying truth for so long. Caleb sat with her on the courthouse steps while she cried, not touching just present. Sometimes presence is all anyone can offer. They believed us, she said when she could speak. They actually believed us. You gave them no choice. You documented everything, stood firm, refused to be silenced. I couldn't have done it without you. You cut me down, protected me, gave me the chance to fight back. Caleb shook his head. You were already fighting, already documenting, already choosing courage. I just showed up. At exactly the right moment. They sat in silence watching Helena go about its business. A town that didn't know or care about Silver Ridge's drama. Just another day in the territory. Burke found them there. So what now, he asked. Trial's over. Vernon's sentenced. You're both free to go wherever you want. Caleb looked at Catherine. She looked back. They'd been through something together. The kind of something that changes people, binds them in ways that don't untangle easily. I don't know, Caleb admitted. My cabin's gone. 14 years of life burned to ash. I could rebuild. Could find another valley, another mountain, another place to hide. He paused. Or I could stop hiding. Catherine's eyes searched his face. What does that mean? It means I've been running from Sarah's death for 14 years. Running from people, from responsibility, from the chance to fail again. But these last weeks with you fighting Vernon, standing for something, I remembered what it feels like to be part of the world instead of hiding from it. He offered his hand to help her up. I'm not ready to go back to the mountains. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I think I'm ready to live again. Catherine took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. Where will you go? Wherever you need someone to stand with you. If you'll have me. Catherine smiled, first real smile Caleb had seen from her. I'll have you. Burke watched this with the knowing look of a man who'd seen love start in stranger ways. I'm appointing you deputy marshal, Burke said to Caleb. Temporary position. Help me clean up the rest of Vernon's network. There are more people involved, more corruption to root out. Could use someone who knows the territory and isn't afraid to fight. Caleb considered. Being a lawman again. Having purpose again. Standing for something instead of against everything. I'll do it, on one condition. What's that? Catherine comes too, as official consultant. She knows the families, knows who suffered, knows what justice should look like. We do this together or not at all. Burke grinned. Done. So Caleb Strand became a deputy marshal, and Sister Catherine Webb became something new, something the territory had never seen. A nun who rode with federal law, who spoke for the dead, who taught the living that courage was a choice available to everyone. The old man's voice stopped. The fire in the cabin had burned down to coals. Outside, the Montana night pressed close with cold that promised the full weight of winter soon. Daniel looked at his grandfather with new eyes, seeing the young man inside the old, seeing the mountain hermit who became something more. So you became a lawman, Shio, Daniel said, and Sister Catherine, she stayed with you. Caleb's weathered face creased with a smile that held 30 years of memories. She did, though it took a while before we understood what we were to each other. He stood moved to the window, looked out at the mountains barely visible in starlight. We worked with Burke for 2 years, cleaned up Vernon's network, arrested 18 more people, returned stolen land to families. It was hard work, dangerous work, but good work. And Vernon, hanged in March of 1880, I didn't watch, didn't need to. Justice doesn't require witnesses to be real. Daniel waited. There was more. Had to be more. Caleb turned from the window. His eyes found the old photograph on the mantel, a woman with kind eyes and determined chin wearing simple clothes instead of a habit. Catherine left the order in 1879, got a dispensation from the bishop. She said the church had taught her to serve God, but God's work didn't require vows, required action. He picked up the photograph, ran his thumb across the glass. We married in November of 1881. Small ceremony. Burke officiated. We rebuilt my cabin, higher up Different Valley. Started a life. Daniel's eyes widened. Grandmother was Sister Catherine. Is. She's upstairs asleep. 65 years old now, and still fierce as a winter storm. Caleb set down the photograph, sat back in his chair. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. We had 3 children. Your father, James, was the middle one. Sarah Catherine came first, named for my sister. Then James Burke. Then Rebecca. They grew up hearing this story, grew up understanding that silence costs more than speaking. That comfort is not the same as safety. He looked at Daniel with eyes that had seen too much but still chose to see clearly. Your grandmother started a school. Not just for children, for anyone who wanted to learn. Reading, writing, arithmetic. But also law, rights, how to document injustice, how to speak truth to power. Did Silver Ridge change? Slowly. Some people never forgave us, thought we'd destroyed something good. Others realized we'd removed a cancer. It took years, decades. But yes, it changed. Caleb leaned forward. Burke retired in 1905, died in 1910. Best man I ever knew besides my father. Your grandmother and I came back here to the mountains, built this cabin, watched the world from a distance now. But we're not hiding, we're just resting. Daniel stood, walked to the mantel, looked at the photograph of the woman who'd been a nun, a witness, a fighter, and became his grandmother. Why didn't you ever tell me? Wasn't the right time. But now you're going to war, going to face choices that don't have easy answers. You need to know that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing what matters more than fear. The old man's voice carried the weight of lived truth. When I saw your grandmother on those posts, I had a choice. Walk away safe, or stop and risk everything. I chose wrong with Sarah, let fear and convenience win. With Catherine, I chose right, chose to stand when standing had a cost. He met his grandson's eyes. You're going to face moments like that, Daniel. Moments when the easy choice is to look away, to let someone else deal with it, to tell yourself it's not your problem. What do I do to? You stop, you stand, you refuse to let evil call itself normal, just because everyone's too comfortable to challenge it. Caleb stood, put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. The rope never forgets, boy. That's what your grandmother taught me. When you tie someone up, when you make suffering public, and call it justice, that rope remembers. Those posts remember. And eventually people remember too. He squeezed Daniel's shoulder. Be the one who stops. Be the one who cuts the rope, even when it gets, especially when it keats. Footsteps on the stairs. Both men turned. An elderly woman descended, white hair in a braid, eyes bright despite the hour. She wore a simple nightgown and shawl, moved with the careful deliberation of age, but her spine was straight. Catherine Webb Strand looked at her husband and grandson and smiled. Telling war stories, she asked. Telling the truth, Caleb said. She came to stand beside him, took his hand with the ease of 3 decades of practice, looked at Daniel with eyes that had witnessed death and documented suffering and refused to be broken. Your grandfather is telling you to be brave, Catherine said. Let me tell you how. Bravery isn't dramatic. It's not charging into battle with guns blazing. It's quieter than that, harder than that. She touched her wrists where faint scars still marked the rope burns. Bravery is writing down what you see even when powerful people want silence. It's speaking when speaking might cost you everything. It's standing beside someone who's suffering when everyone else looks away. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd lived her words. When you're in Europe, Daniel, you'll see things that are easier not to see. Suffering that's easier to ignore. Injustice that's easier to accept because challenging it is hard. She stepped closer to him. Don't ignore it. Don't accept it. Document it. Speak it. Stand against it, even if you're shaking, even if you're terrified, even if everyone tells you it's not your place. Daniel looked between his grandparents, the mountain man who'd learned courage too late and spent 30 years practicing it, the nun who'd chosen truth over safety and paid for it with rope and posts and public suffering. What if I fail? Daniel asked quietly. What if I can't be that brave? You will fail sometimes, Caleb said. I failed with Sarah. That failure lives in me still. But failure's not the end. It's just an information. You learn from it, you try again, you get better at standing. Catherine added, and you don't stand alone. That's what your grandfather and I learned. Courage is easier when it's shared. Find people who believe truth matters more than comfort. Stand with them. Let them stand with you. The three of them stood in the firelight, 3 generations connected by blood and story, and the understanding that some lessons can only be learned through living them. Outside, snow began to fall. First snow of the season, gentle and inevitable. The mountains received it with the patience of stone. They'd been here before humanity arrived. They'd be here after humanity left. They witnessed without judgment, endured without complaint. Caleb looked out the window at the falling snow and thought about another snowstorm 38 years ago, when Sarah walked to his cabin, begging for help he didn't give. He'd spent 14 years punishing himself for that. Then he'd spent 30 years learning to transform guilt into purpose, failure into future. He couldn't save Sarah, but he'd saved Catherine, and in saving her had saved himself. Not from guilt. Guilt stays, but from the paralysis that guilt creates. The belief that because you failed once, you're doomed to fail always. The rope breaks, Caleb said quietly, more to himself than the others. Systems that look unbreakable, they break. Evil that looks invincible, it falls. Towns that choose silence, they can choose speech. But none of it happens by waiting. It happens when someone stops. He turned to Daniel. Be that someone, boy. When you see the rope going up, when you see suffering being made public and everyone looking away, be the one who stops. Be the one who says, not here, not while I'm watching. Catherine squeezed her husband's hand. And when you come home, and you will come home, tell your story. Write it down like I wrote down the dying men's words. Because silence is how evil gets comfortable, and we don't owe evil any comfort. Daniel stood straighter, not because he felt braver, because he understood now that bravery wasn't a feeling. It was a choice made in the moment when fear was loudest. I'll try, he said. I'll try to be like you. Caleb shook his head. Don't be like us. Be better. Learn from our mistakes. Stand sooner. Speak louder. Cut the rope faster. He pulled his grandson into a hug the kind men give when they might not get another chance. You're a good boy, Daniel. You'll be a good man. Whatever you face over there, remember, you come from people who chose courage over comfort, who stood when standing cost everything. That's in your blood, in your bones. So, use it. The next morning, Daniel left for the train station. Caleb and Catherine stood on the porch and watched him ride away toward war, toward choices that would define him, toward the same crossroads they'd faced in Silver Ridge. The mountains watched too eternal and indifferent. Snow covered everything now, making the world clean and white and temporary. Underneath, the land remained, scarred by human drama, witness to human courage and human cowardice both. Caleb put his arm around Catherine. She leaned into him, these two old survivors, these two people who'd found each other in the worst possible moment and built a life from that finding. Think he'll be all right? Catherine asked. I think he'll face things that aren't all right. Question is whether he'll have the courage to say so, to document it, to stand against it. He will. He comes from us. Caleb smiled. He comes from you. I was the coward who needed teaching. You were the man who cut me down when everyone else looked away. That's not cowardice. That's courage learning to breathe again. They stood together as the sun climbed higher and the snow kept falling and their grandson disappeared toward the horizon. Somewhere in the world, ropes were still going up. People were still suffering in public while others looked away. Evil was still calling itself order, violence, calling itself civilization. But somewhere else people were stopping, were refusing to look away, were cutting ropes and speaking truth and standing together against the comfortable lie that suffering is acceptable if the right people inflict it. The rope never forgets. The posts remember. And eventually, always eventually, courage finds its voice. That's what Caleb Strand learned in 1878 when he cut down a nun from posts meant to teach silence. That's what he lived for 34 years after working as deputy marshal, raising children, growing old beside a woman who taught him that truth matters more than comfort. The fire in the cabin burned down to ash. The mountains stood their vigil. And two old people who'd once been young and terrified and brave went inside to wait for news from a grandson at war, carrying their story forward into whatever came next. Some stories end. Others just pause, waiting for new voices to take up the telling, waiting for new courage to answer the old question, when the rope goes up, when suffering becomes public, when everyone looks away. Will you stop, Caleb? Strand stopped. Sister Catherine Webb stopped. And in stopping, they changed everything. The rope was cut, the silence was broken, and the mountains remembered.